At what point did you realize she would never become your wife, he would never become your husband? Story 1. When she asked me to bring her home fries after work, so I stopped into McDonald's and got her 2 large fries. I came in with them. She proceeded to take the bag from me, open it up, pull out the fries, and throw them in the trash right in front of me. I was pretty shocked and asked what was wrong. I wanted frozen fries, then asked why I even came over. This caused me to think really hard about things in the past, and there were so many other incidents like this that I just brushed off. Then I realized no matter what I did, she would resent and not be happy with me. Story 2. I don't even remember what the argument was about anymore, but when he grabbed me by the throat in the car was the moment. There's no going back from that or moving forward. Quietly made my exit plans, called off the engagement, and left. That was the first escalation, and I don't doubt that it would have increased over the years had I stayed. Story 3. When I poured my heart out to her, talking about the things that I was passionate about, and then she looked at me and said, "I'm bored," with a self-amused look on her face like she thought she was being cute. Story 4. When I cried about him doing nothing for my birthday or Valentine's Day, and he ignored me and watched thirst traps on TikTok as I sobbed next to him in bed. Or when I asked him why he was constantly lying to me, and him replying, "Well, there's no consequences, so..." Story 5. A friend told me, "It's been a year that I hear you tell me the same stories about him, the same rants, the same complaints. I don't tire of you, my friend, but don't you tire of repeating yourself? Will you be telling me the same words in 6 months, 6 years, 16 years? Story 6. Left town for 2 weeks for a trip through the wilderness. I missed her like crazy and thought about how great it will be to see her once I get back. As soon as I get back home, I call her, and the first thing she says is, "Oh wow, I didn't think about you at all." That really hurt, but was the wake-up call I needed for that terrible relationship. Story 7. When he lost his job, and 2 years later I started to put a dot on the calendar whenever he went to the casino while I was at work. The fact that I felt the need to do it was telling enough, but then when faced with it, he flat out denied how often he was going. He was going 3, 4 times a week, and I found out later he was thousands of dollars in debt. I was out of there. Story 8. Lord, and lots of cheating during pregnancy, which should have been the penny drop moment, but honestly, I was knee-deep in a mental health crisis and couldn't see the forest for the trees, let alone evaluate the longevity of my relationship with the father of my child. The real moment of clarity came 10 days postpartum. I was recovering from an emergency C-section after a traumatic 36-hour labor, the most pain I've ever experienced. He was out running errands, and I asked him to grab me a coffee. He told me it was out of his way, and he couldn't. I was shocked. An hour later, he walked in with a gas station coffee, and I remember thinking, "Oh, he's pulled through. It's not the best coffee, but it's the thought that counts." Well, I was wrong. It was a coffee he purchased for himself. I realized in that moment that I wasn't even really a person to this guy. He literally did not see my humanity or care for me in the slightest. He said he wanted to marry me, but he couldn't even get me a coffee under those circumstances. BC, it would require him going 5 minutes out of his way. Story 9. We were at my parents' house and got a good deal of snow overnight. In the morning, I went out to help my mom shovel. He sat on our couch on his phone for almost 2 hours while my mom and I shoveled. He had winter clothes with him. We had extra shovels. I asked if he wanted to help, and he just said no. It didn't itch at his conscience in the slightest to see me and my mom out the window working while he played Angry Birds. I wasn't mad. It's not his house or his driveway. He was a guest. But I just knew in that moment our sense of care or duty or responsibility or something along those lines did not align, and we had an expiration date. Story 10. We'd been together for half a year. I was talking about pink taxes and other women-oriented social issues, just generally complaining, ranting about it since I'd written an essay on it recently. All he had to say was, "Since I'm not a woman, none of that affects me, so I don't care about." It took me another 6 months before I realized, but I think that was the moment I stopped seeing a future with him. Story 11. I dated a woman who turned into a beast when she was hungry. It happened often. Right after eating, she would be fine. She would say things like, "Wow, I feel so much better now," etc. When I pointed out the correlation between being hangry and the difficulties it caused, she refused to see it, refused the idea that hunger was what caused her to be so different. So I knew she was a complete, and it would never work out. Story 12. She said she didn't feel loved or supported when I had done everything in my power to love her and support her. I was so burnt out, and she wasn't listening when I tried to explain that. When she ended it, I just let it happen. She was mad I didn't fight to keep her. I didn't have anything left to give. Story 13. I was hit by a distracted driver as we were each traveling 50+ mph. He T-boned me at an angle toward the front of my car, causing me to spin across multiple lanes of traffic, and go backward into a steep ditch off a major highway. He was my emergency contact, and my iPhone immediately notified him of my potential accident as well as my location. He texted to ask if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure, but I'd been hit at high speed and to please come to the scene as I was very upset. He said he'd just gone over to his parents' house for a BBQ and that he'd check in with me later. I had a concussion for 2 weeks and was severely bruised everywhere. My dad ended up coming, and all my concussed brain could do was keep asking when my partner was going to arrive. My dad said, "Honey, he wouldn't leave a barbecue after you were in a serious car accident. I don't think he's ever coming." Found out 2 months later that he'd also been cheating on me for about 8 months as well. This was all this year. Sometimes I still can't believe it. We were together for 3.5 years. Story 14. We dated 4 years, we broke up for a year, and then got back together for a 5th year. Throughout that year, I was going out of my way to achieve a lot of my dreams and doing a lot of things that gave me more independence. One day we were talking about the things I had achieved, and I said, "I always said I was going to do this stuff." And he said, "I know, but I never thought you'd actually do it." And it was then that I realized we weren't going to stay together, and that I instinctually knew he didn't expect me to go after my dreams, and that's actually why I broke it off with him the first time. Story 15. She really wanted to have kids, but she was incapable of looking after herself. Like, she was always late and overpacked for flights. I'd never missed a flight until I met her. If she can't take care of herself, she can't take care of kids. I already knew I'd have to be the breadwinner, so it's not like I could see myself doing all the cooking, housework, and childcare as well. It wasn't going to be a partnership. Story 16. He told me he didn't want me to go to a concert for a band we both liked because he was taking his new girlfriend and didn't want there to be any issues. That is how I found out that we weren't exclusive. Broke up straight away. About 2 years later, we met randomly, and he ended up crying about how unhappy he was with her, how much he missed me, and how even though they lived together, he slept on the couch. Yeah, sure, bud. Story 17. He and I were traveling the Sea to Sky highway to Whistler. I looked over at him and had a premonition that one day I would be making that trip with someone else. There was no animosity. Nothing was wrong in the relationship. I just knew in that moment he wasn't going to be my husband. And he isn't. I married a different man and have been happily married for nearly 15 years. Story 18. When we were waiting for a musical to start, and I asked him jokingly if I were to make the Broadway musical Transformers, what would you look for? And he just shot me down, telling me it was a horrible idea and made me feel ashamed to even be a fun, creative person. I realized he was trying to make me into his idea of a wife and dumped him the very next day. Story 19. Honestly, I think it was just a gut feeling because deep down I knew I didn't want to marry him. I didn't pester too much about getting married or having kids, even after being together for 5 years. He showed no initiative to propose anyway, by not doing any of the things he said he would need to do before getting married. It bothered me, but at the same time not nearly as much as it should have, I guess. I'm married to someone now, and I'm so glad it turned out the way it did. I cannot imagine being with anyone else. Story 20. I had a gut feeling all along, which I overlooked because I loved him, and he had legit a lot of great qualities alongside the issues. But I think the one moment was when I told him how unhappy I was with the relationship and his behavior, and 2 days later he tried to get me to look at engagement rings. I realized that he was content with our miserable life and wanted to protect it, whereas I wanted to improve it. Also, I felt like he was trying to buy me shutting up about all the real problems we were having. When we broke up, I told one of his friends, who asked, that part of the issue was that I couldn't see us getting married with how unhappy we both were. Like, I couldn't imagine one more year of that, never mind the rest of our lives. Friend heard this as, I broke up with him because he hadn't proposed, and then tried to get us back together by telling me X been planning to propose and telling X that I'd been frustrated waiting for a proposal. Story 21. When he proposed. I knew he didn't mean it when he asked, and I knew it didn't count when I said yes. We'd been together for 6 years, and I was telling him I was unhappy with the fact that things had stagnated. It was one of many talks like that, and I was crying. He knelt down and asked me to marry him. I felt like I had to say yes, so I did. But I knew in the moment it wasn't real. We cuddled for a few minutes before I said I didn't think he'd meant it. His response was, well, you kind of forced my hand. The whole thing felt so gross and so unfair. Nothing changed after that. We never talked about that moment again. I broke up with him a few months later. Story 22. When I realized just how bad her anxiety about everything was, we went to a show with a plan for escape if she got overwhelmed. Within 5 minutes, she had sprinted out the door and drove herself home. Not angry, as we had this idea planned, as public transit was an easy pivot. The next day, she revealed that she went to the site of one of our early dates and started crying her eyes out, imagining that I chose to hook up with someone cooler than her. That was absolutely the "we're not going to go on much longer" moment. but the fact she thought I was cool enough to pull that off flattered me. So we stayed together another month. Story 23. When I saw his note of all the money I owed him over our 8-year relationship, some was school fees he'd lent me when he'd asked me to move continents for him, but some were holiday expenses, etc. He never told me he was keeping track of that he expected any of that back. Apparently, we'll figure it out meant we shared expenses like roommates, and he expected every dollar back eventually. He made a lot more than me, and we shared living expenses 50-50ths. I paid it all back and left. Too bad I didn't charge him for emotional labor or moving expenses or go after his super. Story 24. I was having a somewhat rough period in life, and one evening I told her how I wasn't really happy with how things are in my life, clearly explained that us together is the only happy thing I have. I remember I was hoping she would give me a hug, but she moved away looking at me like I was sick and just said I should talk to someone. Then she left to sleep at her place. Story 25, 4 years. The way he treated my new kitten like competition reminded me of when someone told me that a lot of DV starts worsens when the woman is pregnant or just had a baby because they suddenly have competition for your affection or something. There were many other red flags, but it was the last nail in the coffin. I could no longer trust that he wouldn't get violent with me one day. Story 26. We were doing a diving course, and at the point where we had to check each other's rig, he kind of mindlessly pushed me to get me to turn. And because the rig was heavy, I really noticed how focused he was on his performance, him acting out the role of safety officer rather than actually being safe. I realized he wanted to act out a version of himself that he saw as manly and competent, but he really wasn't interested in being competent. He was a little boy and always would be. 25 years later, we caught up and he's a frozen person, still a little boy pretending to be an adult. Now it's also very obvious he's also a coward. I wonder if they are connected. Story 27. When I realized that he didn't want to go through the hard things with me. Over our 10-year relationship, I made excuses for his behavior and justified the ways that he didn't support me. The last straw was when I got sick and needed support, and he didn't show up. He didn't understand that he should have been there and told me that I should have just asked. I did, but he said he'd rather play video games. It finally dawned on me that my struggles were nothing more than an inconvenience for him, and I'd never be a priority. I told him I was done and packed my things the next day. It was the best decision I've made. Story 28. Her parents caught us mid-elopement in the backyard, just as her dog, draped in a scarf, was about to officiate. 50 stuffed animals looked on as witnesses, their button eyes filled with silent judgment. Before we could seal the deal, her mom called out, "Hey, come inside, it's time for lunch." So we abandoned our vows, switched gears, and spent the afternoon playing pirate and princess instead. We never went back to our wedding day after that. Guess the magic was one time only. Story 29. When he wouldn't bike back to Target half a mile away to exchange our brand new bed sheets for the correct size. We didn't have a vehicle, and he wouldn't let me take his bicycle. We had just arrived home from Target. I had walked back while he rode his bike. He ended up screaming and spewing spittle at me, an inch from my face as I stood there, motionless and in shock. Spoiler alert, I ended up marrying him anyway, after a year of coercion on his part. I have regretted it every single day for the last 10+ years. He has been physically, emotionally, financially, and verbally abusive this entire time. This past March, he fractured the left side of my rib cage, which, after all the other physical abuse, was the last straw. But it's okay. I'm finally leaving him tomorrow. Story 30. When I realized I was in love with who he had been and not who he was now. We were both at different points in our lives. He wanted kids, the house, the small town where his friends were. I wanted no kids, to travel, and to move away for career and a fresh start. He had had the same dreams when he was younger, but was content where he was. I'm now married to someone else years later. We travel every year to a different country, move to another city, have a completely different career, and my ex is still living doing exactly what he was doing 15 years ago. I would have been miserable. Story 31. He was a libertarian, which sounded great in theory. I almost became a libertarian for a week or so when he described an absence of regulation and maximum personal freedom. Then we reached the inevitable discussion of how society would still function if it was only funded voluntarily. How would we still have hospitals? Or were they picturing a breakdown of society with no hospitals, schools, and infrastructure at all? Then we hit the same point that you will always hit when talking to a libertarian. They insist others will voluntarily donate to keep society running around them, while they are never expected to contribute anything. Why? Because they are, usually young white male, geniuses in their own minds, on their way to inevitably becoming millionaires, and will contribute more than enough later, even if they are selfish all their life and will never actually choose to. Society should accept that they will contribute more than any woman or minority ever could just by existing. I'm still waiting to find a libertarian who doesn't fit this pattern. Story 32. When she kept letting flirting men near her and giving her Instagram and Snapchat to them and telling me that she just wants new friends because she doesn't have anyone to talk to. Going out every weekend alone to bars and clubs when we're in financial trouble, not helping me pay the bills and lying about paying rent. Telling me that I am not a man and I don't make her feel like a woman when I asked, could we split the bill because I didn't have money to pay for 2 meals? There are a lot of things, but I was so in love that I gaslighted myself that it's normal and she will change. She never did, and when we broke up, we went to a rave together, and another man approached her and asked if she is single. She said yes to him in front of me when I was dancing next to her at a party, what I paid for her. With that same dude, she went on a date the next week. By then, I knew it's over. That one lasted 4 years. I learned a lot, at least. Story 33. Not me, but for my sister. She had a boyfriend in college and a few years beyond who we all thought she would marry. He was a perfect fit and already felt like part of the family. But then our parents got divorced, and his behavior through it all was selfish and uncaring. My sister broke up with him and eventually ended up marrying someone else. 20 years married now, plus 2 teenage kids, as did he. Story 34. We are still together and going strong, but from the very beginning he made it clear he never wanted to get married, and if that was a deal breaker for me, then I should leave. In pretty much every way, we are a married couple other than having the marriage certificate. Our finances are combined. We are each other's legal power of attorney in the event that one of us are incapacitated, and we have legally drawn up all the documentation to grant us all the same rights as an actual married couple. I even legally changed my last name to his, but actually being married has never been in the cards because his parents went through a very nasty divorce that jaded him. Story 35. We swung by his friend's house and his friend was showing off a pretty anniversary ring he bought his wife. He turned to me and said in front of everyone, "Don't you ever think you are getting something like that." That's the moment I realized that a man that loves me wouldn't say things like that to make me feel small. Story 36. Whenever my friends asked me, "So when are you getting married? Do you want to get married?" I would usually laugh it off, but deep down I knew the answer. I didn't want it. Not with this person. He brought way too much negativity and pain into my life. Eventually, I realized I couldn't take it anymore and decided to break things off with him. Story 37. When she stayed in contact and seeing people she had a history with, without ever bringing them up to me. When she'd rather break up than talk about the issues at hand. Or when she would accuse me of cheating on her. Yeah, I think that made me realize she wasn't going to be the one. Story 38. He had zero ambition in life. He's a college dropout and has been working in the same low-paying job for the past 5 years. We started having this routine after work to just play some games together, and then he'd drop me home. He was living with his parents. He was like 25, which is normal here, but with that lack of ambition, I couldn't take it. I'm actually the male in this scenario, and this breakup made me realize what I was doing. I went back to college and finished my master's in a field I love. I'm now married with 3 kids. Story 39. When he said one person will always love the other more in a relationship, and I realized that person who loved more at the time was me. You ain't wrong, but damn, guy. Left me with a perpetual feeling of him having one foot out the door, which he continuously proved true. Still breaks my heart. Story 40. He's got into an accident, hit a biker with his car, decided not to tell me anything, and disappeared for 2 months. Didn't answer calls or texts. When everything calmed down, he came back as if nothing had happened. I didn't want to burden you with my problems. Nope, it doesn't work like that. Story 41. I had an ex who had made plans to spend my birthday with me while I was away at college and only seeing him on weekends. On the way back to college the day before my birthday, he told me he would be just dropping me off at my dorm after dinner as he had a last-minute band practice that he couldn't cancel because he had to show his commitment. When I cried, he punished me by not getting me anything for my birthday either. Story 42. Ex-fiancé. We thankfully never tied the knot or did the announcements things. We'd been in a rough patch for a long time, and I discovered he was also dealing with a paranoid break and refused all treatment or even acknowledging it was happening. Then found out he proposed to me solely because he needed a tool to keep me with him and routinely used it to make me feel isolated. I want my family to actually be excited when I tell them who I'm going to marry, to make me feel guilty for thinking about leaving. I thought we were in this together. We were supposed to get married and insert string of my dreams. I'd stupidly told him about my future, and so on and so forth. Even pushed me to go to work while awaiting COVID results, as I'm symptomatic knowing I worked in an old folks' home and caused a massive COVID shutdown that led to multiple deaths. All because he wanted to be home alone to FaceTime an ex. Treated my animals like garbage too, and I'm still mad at myself I let him do that. My final straw was when the dog we got together stood between my legs and growled at him during a fight as he got up to approach me. She'd never been his fan, but was always nothing but a sweet and loving girl. So to see her change into my protector against him was the eye-opener. I realized how miserable I'd be with him and left that night. Story 43, 7 hours before I had a big test. She wanted to argue. There was no not arguing with her. If you stayed quiet, she kept going. If you disagreed, she kept going. If you took her side, you were lying. 2 hours into the fight, I tried to ignore her and go to bed. She told me to admit we're through. Might this be a way out? I said yes. She started questioning if I was serious, so I had to lay it out. Yes, we're done. I'm sick of this. We are done. We're over. You're moving. We're done. Now go pretend to sleep on the couch for 15 minutes before you coming back in here and yelling more about how I didn't come rescue you from the couch. Yes, I know you that well, and I'm sick of all your BS. Go sleep in your in-car. I don't care. We are 100% done. I'm going to sleep before you ruin my final tomorrow. We are done. Edit. I could insert a classic you Karen type comment, but I won't. My ex had many legit problems in life that I hope she was able to work out. Maybe she learned something from losing me? Story 44. They texted me twice after I had surgery. Once the day of to ask how it went, then once a couple days later. I had a 2.5 weeks recovery time and didn't hear from them for almost 2 weeks. I texted them a few times, but when they didn't respond, I stopped. I also had Snapchat solely to communicate with them and saw their stories that they were out and about with other people, so they were clearly just ignoring me. Story 45. We had to go to Disney every year on Christmas with her family. I happen to be visually impaired and need help getting through crowds. She ditched me in the park and walked off to leave me to fend for myself after another disagreement over lunch or something trivial. Her mom wound up having to take my hand instead so we could get back to the car. I knew it was done after that. Story 46. I was made redundant at my job. I was 2 months from my ILR, permanent residency in the UK, from the last day at my work. Getting a new job in another company was impossible. It wasn't a matter of my S or qualification. I have PhD from US Ivy League school where I was a straight A student. If any European applied for same job as me, they will get the job regardless of their qualification or S set. I was trying internal jobs within the company that made me redundant. I was going to the job interview that I really wanted, within the company. I called up my ex asking, in case I don't get it, will she be willing to get married so that I can switch on her visa? I know, last-ditch attempt. I didn't really want to get married like that either, but I guess it was my nerves. Me seeking any bit of support in my desperate situation. She said no, flat out. I ended up getting 2 offers from within the company, including the job I wanted. I took a week off after that and took a solo car trip in South England. You know, all the places I wanted to visit for past 5 years but couldn't because we were saving to pay off her loan from government for her mortgage, first-time buyer scheme. She wanted to come along and was surprised and hurt when I refused. It was beginning of the end. Things were never the same after that. I moved continent for her, took a salary cut, and possibly sabotaged my career. All she had to do is be there for me just one in time. Absolutely broke my heart. Story 47, he would never walk with me, always ahead. This is small compared to everything, and it ended violently, but it started subtly, like walking ahead of me and downplaying my feelings, telling me I am just sensitive and needy. Then it increased with time like a frog in boiling water. I am lucky to have left. Listen to your gut. Do not let someone tell you what you need, and certainly do not stay after they hit you. Story 48. She couldn't admit fault for the smallest things and interpreted my frustration as believing she was stupid or clumsy or whatever. It was always the toast burned. Who put the toast in the toaster? The ex fell. Who knocked it off by not looking where they were going? I don't care about small mistakes like that. And it doesn't affect my opinion of someone until they can't just say, oops, I did that, and move on. Because if they won't admit fault in low-stakes situations, can you trust them to act fairly when things really matter? Spoiler, no. Story 49. She loved South Park. I made a clear reference to the show, an episode that we watched together, as part of a joke, and she took it literally. Joke went completely over her head. Happened again in a checkout line a few days later, but this time she got angry about it. She complained about everything I've ever done in the past year on the 15-minute ride way back to her house. She got out of the car, still bitching. I drove away. Story 50. Almost every time I went to her dorm room, she was in a depressed mood. Honestly, it was kind of nice knowing I could do something to brighten her day. One day, I went to her dorm room in the AM and saw a bottle of Crown on her nightstand. I made some comment about starting early, and honestly, I didn't think it was an issue. She made a comment about 3/4 of it being gone that very morning. I hope she's doing well. Story 51. When he told me he was no longer attracted to me due to my weight gain, because he's autistic, he didn't broach it well, although I'm not sure such a thing is possible, and used words like disgusting and lazy. He wanted to stay together and for me to work on my weight. I just couldn't stay with someone who valued physical appearance that much, especially as I had been bigger than this when we had dated in the past. Other early warning signs included him refusing to get tested for sleep apnea for months, despite his snoring leading to serious sleep deprivation for me, and then refusing to wear the mask more than twice after being diagnosed. Sugar on top was when he asked me to cover the cost of the CPAP after we split, because in his mind he only bought it for me. Story 52. When I realized her insecurities about me and my behavior were coming from her projecting her own actions onto her perception of my actions, i.e. she had thoughts and did things she wouldn't want me doing, but because she was doing them, she was suspecting me for doing worse. She knew where I was at all times, and I purposefully volunteered access to my messaging apps specifically to address her insecurities towards me. Yet she suspected me. Yeah, then it hit me she's projecting. That's when I told her that we are breaking up at her convenience, when she can afford to move out. Story 53. My brother was walking home, and he was high on something. A dog started following him, and he thought feeding it would get the dog to leave him alone. It didn't. Anyway, he calls me to come help him. I'm a 5-foot woman, and my ex was 6 foot. My ex was living with me at the time, and we got out of bed. I went out, and he stayed back and closed the door behind me, which I was not expecting at all. I went downstairs by myself to see where he was at. My brother ran upstairs, and they locked me outside. That was the moment I fell out of love with him. Me and my brother aren't close either. He's a massive piece of, and I wish that dog tore him up. Would have saved me a lot of future heartbreak. Story 54. Lying to my face after I opened the relationship. He moved states, and we both have needs. It just seemed realistic, only for me to catch him in a lie over someone I had already approved. Like, why? What's the point of sneaking around? So it hit me that this was just the one lie I had caught him in. It gave me an ick I couldn't shake. So I got tested for loser cooties and blocked his number. Story 55. I thought she was just scarred by her past, and that's why she acted towards me in such an inconsistent and inconsiderate way at times. I ultimately realized she avoided feelings, her own and mine, and that this was a barrier to her experiencing empathy. That and the total avoidance of communication on her part. I was deeply in love, but I realized she's not the one for me. I wish her well. Story 56. When we agreed that marriage wasn't important to us, we don't need to stand in front of our friends and family and proclaim our love. Plus, I think us not being married shows each other how much we love each other more. So many married couples force themselves to stay together because divorce is costly. We know that the other person could just choose to leave and it not cost a thing, like divorce does. That shows that we want to be together, rather than it being forced upon us. Side note, I don't actually care whether we love each other more than other couples. I don't judge other people's relationships like that. Story 57. I told her I was female to male trans and wanted to medically transition. She flipped out. She was bi, so the gender wasn't the issue. She felt that it was disgusting to alter God's creation. After the fight, she contacted my childhood bully and cheated on me with him. She came back the next day, love-bombing me and acting all sweet. That weekend, we were out at a bar. I was drunk. Bully came up and revealed to me that she cheated on me with him. I tried to walk away. He wouldn't let me. I punched him hard enough to break his jaw. I was arrested but let go after the cops found out he wasn't letting me leave. Told me to get myself sober as I had trouble controlling my drinking. We broke up. She was not happy about it. I got myself sober. Been 6 years now. And she tries to talk to me fairly regularly, begging for another chance. That, especially when she sets as a requirement that I detransition. Story 58. It's incredible how telling these pivotal moments can enlighten our paths. I've had my share of wake-up calls too. One that stands out was when I realized my partner would rather spend money on his friends than on our future together. It hit me hard. If someone can't prioritize shared goals and mutual support, they're not the right one for a lifelong commitment. It's painful, but ultimately freeing to recognize these truths. I'm grateful for the lessons learned and the strength to move on. Remember, love shouldn't come with constant questioning or compromise of your values. Story 59. After 4 years of dating, I finally accepted that what I'd suspected by 3 months in and known for certain by 2 years in was the inescapable truth of the matter. She was a constitutionally dishonest person. No matter how wonderful she was in all the ways she was wonderful, I would never truly know and trust her. I'd never have a partnership with her. She would always come first as far as she was concerned. The whole in sickness and in health? Never gonna happen. Word to the wise, people lie. Ain't no big deal depending on the nature and frequency. But someone who is fundamentally dishonest is incapable of admitting fault and sincerely apologizing. That person should never, ever be married. The self-righteous and sadistic way she treated me and my family after I broke up with her was, I'm sure to her dismay, totally validating, totally cathartic. It turns out that all along, she was just a bitch. Story 60. When she looked me in the eye and said, I'm going to go text all those guys I used to sleep with to hang out, and you're going to cut off all of your female friends. If you don't agree, I'll run out into the street right now. All the love in my body drained out of me during that moment. I knew I could never love her again. Story 61. In 2019, I had a nervous breakdown and my fiancé and me lived on different continents. We both had decent incomes, so would travel often to see each other. Because of this, I didn't want to run away to Australia. I wanted to get my head fixed, so I missed my turn to travel to her. In 2020, the 7th of March, approximately 21:30 GMT, my fiancé's company told her she couldn't leave Australia in case the borders closed and she wasn't able to return. So we accepted we wouldn't see each other for a bit longer. She hated this. She called me her drug, told me I gave her the dopamine hit she needed in life. Passion and crazy, just what I wanted. In June, I called her. There was a dirty glass pipe sat on the shelf behind her. You would have to know what was really for. It turns out without her addiction to me, my ex used meth. I knew at that moment it might have taken a few more years to fully confirm it, but I knew then. Story 62. While walking together to the metro station one morning, she asked, what if we got married? We had been together for almost 4 years and were living together, so the topic wasn't new. Our last agreement had been that we would get married after finishing our studies, if we still wanted to by then. I told her we should stick to the plan for various valid reasons, but deep down, I knew I was just making excuses. Even though everything I said was logically sound, in my heart and gut, I knew the truth. I didn't want to marry her anymore. I no longer trusted her or loved her the way I had in the past. We broke up a few months after that morning. Story 63. Moving in together while dating did it very well for us. I realized if I stay with him, I have to be prepared to pay half the bills and do most of the cooking and cleaning. And if a baby happens, I'd have to also be the primary careover because he has some kind of undiagnosed ADHD situation going on. I've realized he's very selfish and condescending. He'd drop his responsibilities, but always has some excuse for why he didn't do something well within his pay grade. I'm so stressed out lately, I'm just checking out of the relation. Story 64. I had a pregnancy scare, but figured that it was fine. We weren't planning on thinking about kids until we got married and were more settled, which was at least another year away. But we'd make it work. I told him I thought I might be pregnant, and he interrupted me to say, we can't afford that. We could. And how soon are you going to take care of that? Implying abortion. Luckily, I wasn't pregnant, but wow, I really thought I had a committed partner, and I didn't. I'm glad I didn't have to make the hard decision to either abort or become a single parent. Bullet dodged. Story 65. My friend's son just called off his wedding because his fiancé had a fit about him wanting his son from a previous relationship as his best man. They dated for a long time and they have kids together, which his son loves and his adores the bride. Everyone was shocked that things took such a turn. Nobody saw it coming. Her reasoning was their wedding was about them creating their own family and the kid could sit with the grandparents. Irony is that she has a son also, which his whole family accepted as their own, and he was walking her down the aisle. My friend's son called off the whole wedding, and now she's shocked and hurt. I told my friend that they raised a good one. Story 66. When watching an episode of Gilmore Girls and Lorelai says, that'll do pig, she refused to believe it was funny and quoting the movie Babe. I showed her the clip. She still insisted she was calling her daughter a pig. There was no reasoning whatsoever. I knew it was the end. I imagined hundreds of arguments she would insist on her own opinion even with records facts presented to her. I couldn't deal with that level of inanity and dipped. Story 67. Every time I was sick or injured, he would get angry with me when I asked for help. My dad's like that too. And then I started connecting the dots on all the little things my dad does that made me feel unloved and unhappy, and realized I was dating those things. TBF, I think I was a lot like the guy's mom. So I think we were together because the relationship dynamics were what we knew and were comfortable with by doing what our parents did and not doing what would have made us happy, fulfilled, and uplifted as partners to one another. Story 68. There were lots of small points, but here's one that stood out. I was picking up a card for Valentine's Day or something, but none of the lovey, affectionate ones felt truthful when I thought of her. Made me realize that even though I kept telling myself everything was fine with us, I'd already checked out subconsciously due to the years of trying to avoid her daily outbursts, and it wasn't going to progress any further in a positive direction. Story 69. When she told me she was mad that we split the cost of our first trip together, we had been dating 6 months. The trip was about $4,000. If you love me, You would have paid for the entire thing. I heard different variations of this about other things multiple times over the next few months.